we should begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Oh, got it. We're recording. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's talk by Anna Binta Diallo, whose solo exhibition Wanderings opens at the School of Art Gallery tonight. It is presently open. My name is Blair Fornwald, and I'm Director Curator of the School of Art Gallery. For those who may be listening only, I'm a white, feminine presenting person in my early 40s with short brown bobbed hair, cat-eye glasses, and a septum ring. I'm wearing a denim shirt and a yellow silk scarf, and I'm speaking to you from my home office, where I have kind of a busy array of artworks and books and various things behind me. The School of Art Gallery is part of the University of Manitoba, which is located on Treaty 1 territory. This is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. Signed in 1871, Treaty 1 took territory from 7 Anishinaabe First Nations to make the land available for settler use and ownership. Land acknowledgements are not, of course, constitutive of change, but they remind us that change is imperative and that we must dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. As a preface for tonight's talk, perhaps we might reflect on some of the offerings that Diallo's Wanderings might have for academia and art institutions in particular. Her work questions the presumptive authority of singular narratives and canonical discourses, refusing to privilege one body of knowledge or worldview over another. Instead, it points to the ways that these bodies are intrinsically connected to the fundamentally incomplete nature of any canon. It offers a really beautiful model for a decolonial epistemology, one that I think recognizes the fluidity and complexity of human experience. I think that it is work that is particularly well suited to this site in a gallery that is part of a school and part of a university, where students are both taught and taught to question the inherent biases of what they're learning. Before I turn it over to Anna Binta, I would also like to acknowledge that the School of Art Gallery is generously supported by the University of Manitoba, the School of Arts faculty and staff, donors, and volunteers. Programming is also provided by national and provincial funding agencies. I am particularly thankful for the support of the School of Art Gallery staff, Donna Jones, C.W. Brooks, Glenn Johnson, Jean Borbridge, Hallie Ritter, Zoe LeBrun, and Travis Honey. Huge thanks also to the digital technician at the School of Art, Trevor Baziak, and media and events coordinator, Kaylin Harrison, for their assistance, respectively, with the exhibition and tonight's talk. And of course, we are extremely grateful to Anna Binta Diallo for making the time to speak with us tonight. Anna Binta is a multidisciplinary visual artist born in Dakar, Senegal, and raised in Saint-Boniface here on Treaty 1. She received a BFA from the School of Art in 2006 and her MFA from the Transart Institute in Berlin in 2013. Her work has been shown in galleries across Canada and in Finland, Taiwan, and Germany. In 2019, she was shortlisted for a Salt Spring National Art Prize. In 2021, she was awarded the Barbara Sphor Memorial Prize from the Walter Phillips Gallery and the Black Designers of Canada Awards of Excellence. Her works are in the collections of the Royal Bank of Canada, Equity Bank, Scotia Bank, and private collections. After 15 years based in Oji-Cree or Montreal, Diallo has returned to the Prairies to teach at the School of Art, and we are very happy and lucky to have her. You can visit Anna Binta's exhibition at the School of Art Gallery until December 4th. And we are now open from 9:30 to 5, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, and until 8 p.m. on Thursdays. So if you don't work at or go to the university and it's difficult for you to get out there, Thursday evenings might be a great opportunity for you. And if you come on Wednesday at noon, Education Coordinator Jean Borbridge will be providing tours, followed by a collage activity that you can either do on site or take home to do later. That's every Thursday for the exhibition run. Please remember to bring proof of vaccination and a piece of ID if you do come to visit. And while you are there, please take the time to spend with There's a Cut Hand's incredible video medicine bundle and an exhibit of Robert Hoole's Sandy Bay Residential School series of really haunting drawings. We are also launching a new digital program called Coffee Clutch next week. Coffee Clutch centers the voices of older artists inviting them to have a casual lunchtime conversation with a guest of their choosing. And this is followed the next day by an artist-led workshop, which is suitable for all ages and abilities. The first of these talks will feature Monica Sinclair in conversation with Ildiko Nova on October 22nd, followed by Mobile Creations, a workshop where Monica will guide you through the process of creating a recycled materials mobile on the 23rd. On November 26th, the second Coffee Clutch will feature Elvira Finnegan in conversation with Jennifer Still, which will be followed the next day by Salt Stories, a workshop led by Elvira, where participants will use salt and black paper to create really exciting and spontaneous images. Please visit our website or pick up a newsletter or check out our social media for more information on these and other programs. We're almost done. I'm finally just reminding you that this talk is being recorded and that it's also being live streamed on YouTube Live. We're also going to be recording this and putting this up on our YouTube channel afterwards. So I will just remind you to make sure that your audio is muted and that your mic is turned off. It would be good also to turn your cameras off, otherwise you'll be in the YouTube channel forever. We also have ASL interpreters available for this talk. Their names are Christina and Shannon, and they're going to be trading off throughout. I want to thank you both for this really valuable service. We also have live transcription, which you can turn on or off by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom panel. And if you're having any technical or accessibility issues, please message the SOA Gallery Tech in the chat window, and Kaylin will do her best to help you out. We're going to save questions for till the end of the talk, but if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat box. Or at the end of the talk, you can turn your camera and your mic back on, and you can ask your question directly. We're also going to be collecting questions over on YouTube and delivering them here to Anna Binta on Zoom. So feel free to send them if you're watching on the live stream as well. And just type them into the comments. And finally, after that, it's my pleasure to welcome Anna Binta Diallo. So Anna Binta, please take it away.
Hi, thank you, Blair, for the introduction. I'm just gonna share my screen here. All right, so I hope you can see everything. Good evening. My name is Anna Binta Diallo, and I'm very happy to talk to you this evening about my work, my creative process, and my artistic practice as a whole. Just for the closed caption, I'm appearing on camera as a brown-skinned female presenting, wearing a black long sleeve shirt and a beaded necklace. I'm in a white room with an office, and there's a plant behind me. So I also acknowledge to be located on the original lands of the Anishinaabeg, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'm humbled to be speaking to you tonight, this evening from Treaty 1. So yeah, I'm very happy to be talking to you today. This evening, I really want to talk about my body of work, Wanderings, which is presently at the gallery that is opening this evening. But before I go to that specific body of work, I will maybe do a little bit of a rewind and start from, I'll start from a little bit of a long time ago, do a kind of a little mini bio, but then also work up to the body of works that led to this body of work called Wanderings, and my trajectory and my overall reflections as an artist, as I believe that this is all the things that happened before really influenced how this body of work came to be. So we will start way back at the beginning. And I like to, kind of start from the beginning, talk about myself a little bit, where I was born. I was born in Dakar, Senegal, as Blair mentioned. I grew up in the French Canadian in Saint-Boniface here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And up until 1 month ago, I was living in Tio'tia, or in Montreal, the traditional territory of Kanien'kehá. And I moved back to the Prairies about a month ago. Very excited to be here. Here's a photo of me during my birth in Dakar. I'm going to share a few photos just to give you a little bit of glimpse of the places and the people, the places where I grew up, and the people that surround me, how they had influence on my practice and in the way that I see the world and how I create my artworks. these are my parents before I was born. They met in Paris. My father immigrated to Manitoba after they met in Paris, and they decided to move back to the Francophone community of Saint-Boniface, which is where my mom comes from. And, they both are scholars. They both teach at the university here in Saint-Boniface. And growing up, I kind of had, a lot of influence from my parents to kind of question things a lot as they were educators. And so I think that really influenced me growing up. I also, my dad being a new immigrant, I think at the time he said that he was one of the first Senegalese people to be in Winnipeg. So I think growing up with that, I also knew that, there was, we were a little bit of a different family, just coming from a different place, but having roots in Manitoba as well. And I had a really nice, great childhood here in Winnipeg. Obviously enjoyed the cold weather and the hot summers as well. And as a, I guess, mixed race, Black and French speaking child, I always knew that I was a bit different than my peers at school, but I also grew to, appreciate those differences, which meant that I was very curious about other cultures and different members of my community. And, my parents always just taught us to be proud of all of our heritage, Senegalese, Franco-Manitoban. And so this kind of, was set in at a very young age until I grew up as an adult. We were lucky to visit Senegal on a few different occasions. Many of my family on my dad's side still lives there. And I think the first time I went back was when I was doing my undergrad at the University of Manitoba at the School of Art. And I think going there as a young artist for the first time since I was born kind of opened my eyes a little bit about how I see the world. I saw the landscapes, the Senegalese landscapes. This is a lake that's made out of salt that turns pink. So I saw some beautiful things, but I also saw things that affected me. I think this was the Maison des Esclaves, or the House of Slaves on Gorée Island, which is in Senegal. And I remember visiting this and just kind of realizing a lot of things about, how this is an older drawing of that same place. And just visiting there kind of really affected me because it made me think a lot about how people are born into how where they're born can really affect their life, and what time they're born, and specifically the location. And because I was from Senegal, I always wondered, how many of my ancestors came from that were in Canada or North America or all over the colonized world. How many of those people were am I related to? And this is the door of no return, which is obviously this door that leads to the rest of the world. And so it just kind of really affected me in how I perceived my own life and my own family story, but also that of thousands of displaced Africans at the time. And so, growing up in the prairies, I also was influenced by the landscape here. And also I have a lot of artists in my own family, which also influenced me. My grandfather is Étienne Gaboury. He designed a lot of notable buildings around Winnipeg, like the Precious Blood Church, as well as the Royal Canadian Mint. And he also designed this wall surrounding Louis Riel's statue by Marcien Lemay. And he also designed the bridge, the Esplanade Riel, which crosses the Red River and, really brings together the Francophone and the Anglophone side of the city. So I think having artistic somebody like that in my life really also influenced me and how I saw things. And my grandmother as well did pottery, ceramics. So I grew up going to her studio often and seeing what she would do with her hands. And as well, my mother is a poet, and she writes French poetry. And she also asked me a lot of times to help paint or do paintings for her books. And she was recently the recipient of the Order of Canada. So just to say that on my mom's side, there's a lot of a lot of people I looked up to growing up and still look up to today. So that's kind of like my family history a little bit. And now, I think having all those influences, I really knew from a young age that I wanted to be an artist. So I went to art school as soon as I graduated. And over the years, I really consider myself like a mixed media artist. My practice has shifted over time with the materials that I use. But one of the main conducting threads has always been the use of collage, whether it's collage like painting or digital collage or creating videos with a cut and paste aesthetic. I'm really drawn to blending in imagery in a nonlinear fashion that usually defies the laws of physics. So I first started studying art. I thought I would become a painter. That was kind of my first love. But I also was interested in graphic design. And I saw one of my props is on the Zoom tonight, my old props. So I studied both. I went into painting and I also went into graphic design. And I think I liked both practices as separate things. But after I graduated, I did do a lot of freelance as a designer. But I also, so I did a lot of like movie posters and book designs. Here's for a movie that a friend did. The poster design, and I also did like lots of book covers. But I always consider those things that separate from my artistic practice. And then in 2008, I decided to move to Montreal, and I went to Concordia there, and I studied a program called Digital Technologies in Design Art Practice. And this was a program that was made, for artists who like to use digital technologies. So again, a mixture of design and visual arts. And I did a project there called Night Adventures. And I'm kind of showing this just to show a little bit of like my trajectory as an artist. So for 6 months, I kept a dream diary, and based on these entries, I created designs that were handmade. And I used digital manipulation like Photoshop and Illustrator to kind of create these drawings, that I created based on a dream diary. And I think the reason I like to show these is because although I was interested in playing a lot with like digital technologies, I think the thematics of the work, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to talk about necessarily. So dreams it's an interesting topic, but I think I was just kind of scratching the surface of like what I wanted to do as an artist. So after this program, so I also made this installation from it. It's kind of like it's early work. So I just like to show it kind of just to show how it's transformed over time. I ended up installing it here at this program, our finale show. And, I learned a lot from it, but I also, what it made me realize was that I really wanted to continue studying art. So I ended up a few years later doing my master's. And I think that's when a lot of things shifted in my practice. I really began, trying to dig through the surface of what I would like to investigate. So I started thinking about, that trip to Senegal, and this word kept coming back, nostalgia. And I began questioning if we could be nostalgic for something that we had never known. So in my case, being born in Senegal and not having grown up there, I had this complicated sense of nostalgia. And so I began to just look into that as a departure point. And I decided to look at clippings, start gathering photos, clippings from family albums. And I began to collect things and want to see what would come out of that process. So initially I began making simple collages that were kind of influenced by the images collected from my archive. And they were based on memories, fantasy, and this whole idea of nostalgia. And I also became interested in this idea of like the woven identity, as I like to call it, or somebody who comes from different places. As I blended elements of my existent history and my existent history, imagined fantasies, and universal history. That's what I meant to say. So by mixing memories and archival materials, I wanted to question in my own way the question of identity, and I wanted to invite others to become aware of how we decipher our own history or our origins, as well as our relationships with oneself and with others. So here's for example, a photo that I took or that I used. It was a photo that my dad gave me of him when he was a child. And then the pear on top is kind of, he had told me a story about the first time he came to Canada, how it was the first time he ate a pear. So I would kind of take these stories that were told to me and try and make these visual associations. And these kind of collages, I did that for a little while. I reconstructed stories or memories, and then I deconstructed them. And I did that for a little bit at the beginning of my master's. And then I decided to go from collage with paper and to start working with a video. And then here, I was given a lot of old video footage from family archives, and I decided to think about what kind of project I could do with that. And so I started looking at my paternal, my paternal link with Senegal, but I also, for this next project, decided to look more as well deeper into my Manitoba Francophone history as well. So it was a little bit of like fun digging into my own family history, a lot of learning, like looking at like family trees and things like that. So I think for me as a young person and as a young artist, it was like, it was research, but I was also interested into finding out more about the past. So I also discovered a lot of things from my own family, which I wasn't aware of. So there was on my grandfather's side, a lot of links to the Ojibwe and the Cree and the Métis. Apparently my great grandmother was Cree. So there was all these things that I hadn't really known about growing up. So it was a lot of discovering and I think it influenced as well how I saw my own family, but also how I saw myself, and how it influenced how I made art as well. And I started looking at different links between West African and First Nations. Like I kind of fed all this into my artistic research for my thesis, which is this is just like a page for my thesis, showing the research, and then using all that research to kind of create a body of work. And I quickly discovered the importance of our collective history and its relevance within my own practice, and within my own family as well. So I have a little bit of a video that I made. It's only a minute. I can share it, I think. This kind of shows some of the work that I was doing during that time period. So that work was called Maps, and then I decided to do more video work. And so my final work for my MFA thesis was a work called Negotiations. And it led me to, the question that I asked for this work was, how do we negotiate with differing and sometimes conflicting legacies? So how do you reconcile different and sometimes conflicting heritages? How do you reappropriate part of your cultural heritage that was lost or maybe was interrupted? And should you do that? So these are the questions I started asking myself for this body of work. And I basically created a book that talked about all this research. And I ended up creating like a 6-minute video triptych of, I guess, the answer to those questions in video format. And so this body of work, I think it's still visible online. I'm not going to play it all because it's pretty long, but it was a 3-channel video that, you know, one side had my relationship with Senegal, and the other side had my relationship to Manitoba or Canada. And then in the middle was kind of these other images. So this work, I was very excited to work with video because I hadn't worked with video before. And, you know, I loved incorporating sound, which I did myself as well. And I was very, you know, I also experimented with video installation. And so this kind of finished my time in my MFA. And then I moved on after that. I went to a residency at the Banff Center and decided to expand on all of this work. And because I was looking so long at like my own history, my own family, I think I really wanted to look at other things, but I was still in that mode of looking at like different cultures and how do you negotiate these things. And so I was really interested in this notion of being in between. And so I went back to collage, actually. I feel like I often go there to start with ideas. And so at this residency, I just began kind of cutting things up that I felt were related to that thematic. And I started collecting images. I went into kind of like a cutting frenzy and started collecting images, scanning them, and not really knowing what I would do with them, but I knew that I was going to do something. And then in the end, I ended up kind of printing them out. Well, I scanned them and decided to make these kind of large format compositions that were basically, I call them choreographies, like visual choreographies of all the collages. And each print that I made was, basically it was inspired by all the work that had come before. And this idea of community, like imagined communities, and how certain communities don't have the chance to interact face to face, which was something that Benedict Arnold had described. Or I was also reading Homi Bhabha, who questions identity, national affiliation, cultural hybridity, and the notion of being in between. So I just juxtaposed images that I found from the internet or that I cut up or that I scanned, and I created this series that was called In Between. And I also sometimes mixed in like personal archives and photos. And I think for me, this series was kind of the need to explore something that was a bit bigger than just my own family and my own history. And through this work, I think it was something I was trying to articulate for a long time. And so, I made this series. And then it led me to another question about this idea of the palimpsest. Because I was, a palimpsest is something that is erased after each use so that it can be reused, or a remix of what already exists. And I kind of like this word and decided to continue on like this idea of making more collages. And I started doing, I started asking myself, can the palimpsest be, can the manuscript be the web, or history books, or paintings, or photos? So I kind of just kept going with this, and I decided to start, using photos and painting on them, with personal memories, and these kind of, I tried to expand on this idea of the palimpsest, this metaphor, and so, or this idea that we can keep remixing things over and over again. So luckily, I was able to kind of fuse all of these bodies of work that I've just shown you from the past 5 years. I had this show at the Montreal Art Interculturel, or May, and I was able to, I think it's supposed to show, just some images. I was able to show, all the works that were collages, paintings, prints, and audiovisual installations, and I presented them all together. And I think this was the first time where I had a large enough body of work that felt like they were talking to each other. The primary lens for this work was notably it focused on diaspora, the African diaspora, and indigenous communities, and identity, and this idea of the palimpsest. So I was very happy kind of to have this body of work be shown together. And it was, I think, my first solo exhibition in Montreal. And so it felt kind of complete, like I had reached kind of like a finale to this body of work. So yeah, and then I think I took a break after that because I think I had my first son in 2016. So I kind of took a break from making art for a while. And then in 2018, I was contacted by a gallery in Berlin where they wanted to include some of my collage work for an exhibition called Disothering, Beyond Afropolitan and Other Labels. And they were interested in exhibiting the collage work that I had done for that I had just shown you, called In Between. And so I think this was the first time that I was asked to again, it was kind of this idea of the palimpsest again. It was like reprinting these collages in a different way, in a completely different way. They asked me to kind of cover the entire wall. And this is a really bad photo because it was very dark down there. And the gallery at the time was in a, what's the word? It was in a very strange place in Berlin. Like, this was in the basement. There was no light, but it was part of I think the word is, it's not a crematorium. I think that's what the word is. Yeah. But they have since moved there. But at the time, I had to show this work in this basement. And they asked me to collage the entire wall with these collages. So I did that. And I think that was the first time that I really began to think about space in a different way, or how my work could live in space. I think prior to that, I was, really doing work that was framed on a wall or on a video monitor. So this idea of the frame was kind of shifting after I did this work. And I started thinking about, how would it feel to do something that was an entire space that was collaged, or if things could be rearranged differently in space. And in my graphic designer, my other hat that I wore, I had done kind of wallpaper a lot for other clients. So I decided to think a lot about how could I use this new idea and do something for my artistic practice. So that kind of led me to think about the present work, the Wanderings, that is shown at the gallery. And I started thinking a lot about folk stories or folklore, and how, how we live in a global world, and all these stories that we hear, they wander. And having looked, deep within my own mixed heritage, I really want to widen my scope and incorporate new stories and perspectives into the dialogue. And so, and discover if there's tensions that exist between my own stories and that of other cultures. So that's kind of where I started off for this project. And I went to the Banff Center for a residency again. And that's kind of that was my research topic, was folklore and stories. And I was interested in the universal way in which civilizations tell stories about their own people. And so I started collecting again, and it's kind of this all ongoing thread where I always like to collect things before I start a project. And so I started collecting folk stories. And by collecting, I mean, I would look at stories, I would jot down notes, I would look at books and scan some things or cut things up. Books that were a lot of these books I found not in the trash, but they were books that were meant to be discarded from the library. And so I kind of had a lot of fun looking at all these books, because it again was a nice way to look at at a similar topic that I was looking at, but in a different lens. And it really made me look at how history and identity is formed by the stories that we hear and that we read, and that the images that we see from a young age. And ongoing threads in this body of work was colonialism and racism, language, history. The whole universe basically was something I could look at. And it was very fun for me to kind of have this vast array of things visual material, that I could sort of just start to make a project like that. So at the time, as I said, I was a new parent. So I was reading a lot of bedtime stories, and I kept thinking of certain questions, like what's our favorite story, or like, what's my child's favorite story? What was my favorite story when I was younger, and why? And I looked at all these books that I had, and it just kind of got me thinking, how history plays a big part in how we see the world. I also paid special attention to the characters that showed up in these stories. And a lot of things kept coming back: the rabbit and the hare, or the tortoise and the hare, the turtle, sorry. And then I noticed that, different stories from different locations often would have similar characters come back and forth in different ways. And this was interesting to me as well. And so this is one of my own artworks. After kind of going through all these images, I started thinking about, recontextualizing these characters into my own body of work. I also thought about, who read the story, who wrote the story, where did it come from? For example, I remember in this project, I was like, oh yeah, where does the Little Red Riding Hood come from? And I remember thinking, this is a very classic story that a lot of kids read, but I didn't know anything about like the history of it or where it came from. So for me, it was also a discovery thing. So I would read up on legends and folklore and fairy tales, and it would kind of all filter into this new body of work that I was making. Here's another view of one of the characters that I developed after reading these. I also asked myself, how do I feel connected to the story? Do I feel like a connection to it personally, or is it something that you hear? This is just another example. This is a book that was given to me when I was younger, and so there's definitely like this personal connection. But I also noticed that some of these characters could be found in other folklores as well. So I think after I did all this, gathering of images and stories, I set off to make this body of work that is called Wanderings, and it began to take shape. So that's kind of the backstory to that, how what influenced the work. And then back in the studio, I just decided to start collecting images from different sources. And this idea of remixing things kept going, is always there in my practice. I began collecting tons of images and seeing connections and similarities. Sometimes that happened accidentally, and sometimes I merged them together myself to create new stories. And I realized again that there's so many different combinations of images that can happen, that can emerge after you start collecting things. I also began to think about, how do I want to present these works? Do I want them, like I said, I knew I wanted to do something in space, so not within a frame anymore. So I started to think about, working more large scale, or, would I do projections, or would I do something else? And I think my graphic designer hat came on at a good moment here, because I realized, why don't I design something or design these characters and then, use my collage, my visual arts background, and like merge them together. And so I began, designing these characters based on the stories. And I kind of began to fill them in with snippets of all the stories, of the images and the imagery that I had collected. So again, it was a process that was like a very using my hands, and then digital, and then I would print them out and then cut them out. And I also, experimented with like tools I had never used before. So trying to kind of open up my horizons a little bit as an artist, and like try different things. And I started making 2D sculptures. And so it was kind of a big learning experience as well. But in the end, I was very like, it was very gratifying to kind of work this way, where it was like material, and then digital, and then material again, and then seeing your work come to life in that way is always interesting. I then began to collage the space. As I was at this residency, and I think I was very inspired by like being in this big space, and I just kind of began playing like that, and doing this kind of this collaging of the space, I think I call it. And so here's kind of like a first, my first time just playing with these images that I'd created and discovering how these multiple characters could be installed together. These are just some details of my studio at the time. And then my son came and wandered through some of these stories. So, and then after that, Residency Wanderings began to wander around. I was lucky to have my first exhibition in Toronto with this body of work, and I can just show like a little. So yeah, that was the first time I installed it in a gallery. And I think for me, that was another realization that this body of work had so many ways there's many ways I could present this work. So like all together or in different rooms. And so the reading of the work would change every time I installed it. These are just details from that show. And then I was invited to show some of this work in Finland. I had 2 exhibitions there. And so then I began to think about, how the folk stories, how could I incorporate folk stories from different areas of the world where I installed it. And I spoke with the curator as well about this. And he encouraged me to, look into Finnish folklore. So I was reading a lot about that and incorporating it with some of the imagery that I had already made. And then, so this was kind of a new body of work that was jumping off from that one, specific from the one that I had just shown. And I created some new characters, and I presented them there. I presented it very differently because the walls there were actually these kind of rocks. So I decided we looked at different ways of installing this body of work, which was called Journey to the Heartlands. And yeah, I think there was another gallery in Finland where I also showed the work. And it was in the same kind of way that I had done it prior. So it was, again, looking at different ways to present the work and how the characters would interact was very exciting. I also showed the work here in Canada in Vancouver. And I think what I realized after this was that this body of work was kind of this ongoing thing, because I had the opportunity to show it in gallery spaces, but also this was in Access, the Capture Photography Festival. It was shown at the Canada Line, the subway station. So it had like many different ways to be read and be installed, different characters coming together. And this is at Access Gallery, again, a new configuration of this body of work. And I think I decided at the time, every time I show this work, I will add or retract some new characters that are, either influenced by the location where I show it. So I think that was the first time where I included a whale, for example, in this body of work. And I think for me, it was a way to kind of keep this body of work interesting and exciting, but also to challenge myself to learn a little bit more about where I'm showing it. So yeah, I think I also showed it in Montreal right before I left, but because of the pandemic, it was closed for most of its showing. But that's okay. I also was able to show some of this work at Clark Center in Montreal, and again, it kind of changed based on discussions with the curator. We decided on a different direction here with these kind of boxes. So yeah, this is in Museum London, which is in London, Ontario. That was where it was last installed. Kind of more interacting more with the architecture there than I had in different places. And this is still in Museum London. And I think I was also invited to show digital versions of this work on a few different digital platforms online. This was Third Space Gallery, and this is from the McMaster Museum. There was an online presentation of collage works called The Cut, the Tear, and the Remix: Contemporary Collage and Black Futures, which was there this summer. And I was also invited to have my work shown on this book it's the French translation for Shame on Me, an Anatomy of Race and Belonging by Tessa McWatt, who was the finalist for the Governor General's Award. So yeah, this work has kind of wandered on into its own world. And presently right now in Montreal, or anywhere actually, as part of the Momenta Biennial, there's some wanderings that you can see now on your smartphone. There's a location you can go to it. Like you can go to the physical location, but you can also see it on your smartphone from home. There's like a filter with some of these. So I encourage you to look at that as well. And I think this kind of brings me to the end of my presentation. This is kind of newer work that I'm working on. This is kind of large scale. This is a bad photo, but it's all I had. These are kind of like garden sculptures that I'm working on now for the Visual Arts Center of Clarington, which just opened this week as well. And I'm also working on, I was a finalist for the Auditorium of Verdun. They were looking for art to go there. So I'm working on a body of work that's going there next year, actually. So very busy past few months. And you know, I'm still thinking about what's coming after this body of work, Wanderings, and I'm just showing a few images of like recent new work that I'm working on for a series called Voyager Almanac, where I'm kind of researching. It's a jumping off start from Wanderings, but I'm researching more the connections and entanglements between human life, nature, and our ecological surroundings. So it's still reminiscent of the wandering works and the idea of identity, but I'm more interested in how this body of work is now sprouting into new directions. So stay tuned for that body of work, which is ongoing. But yeah, I think that kind of leaves me to the end of this presentation, and I think there's times for questions or things like that. So thank you very much for your attention and for joining me this evening on this talk. And I hope you get to enjoy the exhibition here at the School of Art. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for a really fascinating talk and overview of your practice. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, do we have any questions from the audience? Feel free to type them in the chat or speak them with your voice, I guess. I guess I can get the question party started. And I wonder if you could kind of speak to your use of images from science and nature. Like, I think one of the things that really kind of like drew me to this work is like, especially the use of celestial images of like stars and night skies. And so I was thinking about that Carl Sagan quote about how we're literally made of star stuff, and maybe that in conjunction with Thomas King's assertion that like the truth about stories is that like that's all we are. And I was like, wow, this work kind of speaks to like the ways that we are both made of literal star stuff and story. Yeah,
I could definitely speak to that. I think in a way you kind of said it, like as I was working on this, I am kind of gravitate towards these images of nature. And I think in my earlier body of the earlier work where I was showing in between, where these collages, these prints, I was also using celestial things. And I think for me that it's like a very I don't know, I guess maybe an easy metaphor for that. Like we are all made of stars, we're all connected, we all come from the same things. And then kind of using those images to kind of drive, I guess not drive that home, but in a way, like for me, it was a way to say that. And it's also a way that I hope that, many people can see themselves within that galaxy. Cause I think it's just like, yeah, it is kind of mind blowing when you think about all that stuff sometimes. So it's like a nice way to kind of talk about that topic without being, without showing things like skin tone or, without naming things, but using something that we all know, and that we can all relate to in a way.
Yeah. And I think like maybe something that's really like profound, but like hard to speak to.
Yes, exactly. It's a difficult thing. Yeah.
There's a question from Amanda. Do you see yourself experimenting with different mediums in the future?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think for me, I'm never one to just say, oh, I'm gonna just, I mean, I think I like experimenting with different things, and collage has been there, whether it was like painting. I feel like collage was there in the way that I use free association in my work, but I don't necessarily like consider myself, oh, I'm only a collage artist, or I only do things with collage. I think I do things, I'm interested in trying different things all the time. And I think for me, it's just, I think the mediums that I use usually serve the topic or the project that I want to work on. So I definitely think I will try and experiment with different things in the future for sure.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
People draw different ways and paint different ways, and their marks, they create a variety of different marks. I noticed that with your collage cutting, the cutting itself is quite clunky. Mm-hmm. Like I think about Bonnie Marin's, and hers is really very tight around the image, but yours was like you include the negative space behind things and you cut things off, and I was thinking, that must be a different kind of mark making, but in the collage world. Am I right? Is that, can you just talk about that for a second?
Sure. I think the body of work in which you're referring to, where like I left cut lines kind of visible. And I think you're right. They are clunky, and they are a little bit like, I think I was okay to show the process of that because I don't know if it's, like you said, it's a mark making way. It's a way of making marks. If I'm not drawing, I would like to see that. I would like to show that there is a process there. And like that, I sometimes I'll like leave things. Yeah, I'll leave the cut marks or the X-Acto knife marks there. Or I'll leave things pixelated, because I think that sometimes that shows to like the process of printing something that was found online. And I think to me, it's not necessarily the idea of having like a pristine image. It's more about like the building of that and how they came from different places. So I think,
so it does carry a content.
Yes.
Content becomes integral. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
There's another question in the chat from Christine, who says, your characters are really beautiful. Did becoming a mother affect how you create characters?
Good question. I think for a long time I was, it's kind of going back to like drawing, being a painter, like you leave your own marks. And then I was a designer as well. And in that world, I would do very pristine things, like, or not pristine, but like doing graphic design is kind of a different way. And I think for me, I was like, how can I bring both of those together? And like, so using vectors, for example, to make a character, I'm not, drawing him. I'm not doing a sketch by hand. It's like but I am doing other things by hand. So I think there was this marriage of like using technology to support kind of like this very tactile thing. So I think looking at lots of storybooks and things, I've always been drawn to like silhouettes though. And that was even when I was painting a lot. I would always paint silhouettes. And I think it was only a matter of time before I started doing that, like within my design work or my, in my, using my technology, my tablet, I guess. So I think, you know, these characters, they were in the making before I was a mother, I think, and they just happened. I think the idea for this project came because I was looking at a lot of books, for sure. Thank you.
For sure. And I think we had maybe a question from Margot, who wants to know maybe a bit more about Home Baba.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of, it's a lot of stuff that I read during my master's. I was told to read Home Baba, I did. And yeah, it's a lot about, I think you could look them up and see, it's like this idea that, our identity. Yeah, I don't know if I want to talk about it all right now. Because it's kind of a lot and my brain is kind of like, yes, it's this idea of mixed identity. And I think the name is Home Baba. And yes, I think Blair wrote it down in the chat there. There's lots of interesting stuff to read. And I think reading that also helped me kind of articulate more about this stuff, because I think it's always difficult as a young artist to know how to articulate things that, maybe not everyone wants to talk about that, or in the art world. I remember at the time I was like, how do I talk about this stuff? And so reading stuff that was written about this helped me kind of articulate things and also be okay to talk about it in my work, and maybe not necessarily like hide it. I think that's kind of what it helped me do. And I think there's like lots of interesting things, there's so much out there once you know about it to go look, to read about. But yeah, I feel like I didn't really answer that question directly, but sorry.
A question from Bernard. Is there a process you use to decide when your characters' faces are blank? What determines when to make them blank or not?
So I guess the space in on the walls or within the characters themselves. Okay, I can read the question there. The faces, sorry. Yeah, so I think it's a good question. I think I'd kind of do it intuitively, in the sense where I'll work on a character, and I mean, none of them are fully blank. I mean, there's no faces on them necessarily, but they're usually filled with things. And I think I base my decision on like the composition itself. I approach every character as if it's its own painting or drawing. And I try and balance it out within that specific thing. So it's kind of, there's no like faces often, like there's no like eyes, mouths, or you can't see them, but you can sense them. And I think I always try and do that in a way where it's like, I want to let the viewer fill in the blanks themselves, or fill in that face themselves with what they think they see.
Yeah, I think you really get that sense of like, you can tell like who's like old or young, or like sort of, they feel quite emotive, even though they don't have sort of facial features or a lot of like signifiers kind of like guiding those decisions.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's very good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, are there any other questions? I guess if there are not, then I would just want to once again say thank you so much for your talk, and to encourage everybody who can to come out and see the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very excited to have everyone go see the show, and just thanks Blair for inviting me for this opportunity to show in Winnipeg after a few years away. So thank you.
And yes, and welcome back to Winnipeg and to the School of Art.
Thank you so much.
So great to have you. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and take care. Have a great rest of your night. And here come nice thank yous.